Edward Perin, welcome to the show.
Hi, happy to be here.
I hope I pronounced that correctly. I've only ever seen your name in print, so please correct me if I got it wrong.
No, you got it right. I think the most incorrect pronunciation I get is Perin, but we used to have two R's. I think there was some time in our history where people just dropped letters off names so they could sign their like pay stubs faster, and yeah, so we
right,
we
right
dropped
on.
that.
Well, I didn't want to get it wrong, so I want to give you an opportunity to correct if I had it wrong. So, you are somebody I've been really chasing, wanting to talk to, because I
Oh,
am currently in therapy. I've got a massive trauma history from childhood. Been in therapy a bunch of times, hasn't worked in a bunch of ways, and so, and you seem very opinionated about it online. So, with that preamble, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself to my viewers who may not know who you are and what you do.
sure. Well, my name's Edward Perin. I'm a psychologist in the great state of Ohio, and I own a small independent online practice where I actually have some interjurisdictional license flexibility with online therapy, and I'm actually really proud to be one of the innovators in this field. My license actually applies to about 43 different states in the United States, and that has not existed until just the past few years. So this is the wild west of psychotherapy, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Interesting. That's got to open up a lot of opportunity because I think traditionally, if you're a family therapist or a licensed psychotherapist, you kind of are in this little bubble, and it's kind of people
Hmm.
that are close to you. And I think telemedicine's expanding a little bit, but I do know that there are, or there have been in the past, regional restrictions as far as like where you can practice. So good to see that's opening up, and I think that's going to change, but provide maybe a lot more opportunity to somebody like me as a client who's looking for a really great
Choice.
therapist that might be somewhere that I'm not, right.
Absolutely. I think that the biggest issue is we're in a much more mobile, society. People move, and continuity of care is a really big deal for people. If you and I had been working together for 2 years and you were really like getting to the root of your issue, and you got like a job opportunity in another state and you had to move, it's not like I suddenly don't know what I'm doing anymore. But that's how the law works. It's unfortunate. I'm hoping one day there's a full national license to practice psychology, but one
Yeah,
day.
I sure hope so because I've had a hell of a time finding a decent therapist, and then the best one I think I had eventually told me like, and I want to get your opinion on this. Why I'm asking this question this way? He's sort of like, you know what the answer for treating or you don't fix kids essentially that are broken, right? Like the answer is not breaking children, right? Like there's only so much you can
Right.
do, right? Like it's he kind of like the analogy he used was imagine that you're a young child and you get in just terrible auto accident and you're mangled, right? And then expecting that kid to walk right for the rest of his life is a little bit extreme. Like that's not rational. And so he was very pragmatic about it. He's like, look, I can take your money all day and you can keep coming, we can talk. But he's like, frankly, you're doing pretty well functionally based on your trauma history and where you should be. He was a PhD at University of Washington. And he specialized in addiction and homelessness. He's like with your history, you should be there. Be very, very thankful that you're not there. And as a client, that's kind of a deeply unsatisfying answer. So I want to get your take on like is that roughly? I know without knowing my background, but is that true? Is that right,
Right.
or do you have to take a different view on that?
Well, I know therapists. I like to think I'm pretty good, but I can't like blow pixie dust and make, magic happen. But I do take a developmental approach. I work with a lot of older veterans. Vietnam era veterans are kind of my specialty. And, a lot of them were very active, physically active dudes. And let's say they played basketball and that was a thing that they loved, but kind of harder to, make some of those jump shots in your 70s. And some of them, they just give up entirely. They say, oh, if I can't do that, I guess I'm just not going to have that hobby anymore. But that doesn't mean that they still can't find ways to connect with something that brings them joy. They can still root for their favorite team. They can go to they could go to games. They could play with other 70-year-olds, maybe in wheelchairs, but they can still connect with it. So like realistically, there might be some limitations, but nope. I don't ever think that people are. We're never done developing. We're never done growing. I I think I'm fundamentally against this idea that there's nothing that we can do. But I absolutely love the message of you're maybe in a good place, or you're not in the wrong place. I don't know if
Right.
that answered your question.
No, no, it did, and I've always struggled with this because I've been internally having this battle. Because, as you know, therapy is very expensive. You're constantly. It feels like there might be a point of diminishing returns. I think it was
Hmm.
absolutely helped me. It completely helped me, but it felt like there was only so far I could go with it, right? And so I just
Right.
wanted to understand from your perspective, in a generalized sense, does that grok, or is it like, now we really should go deeper? There may be a different modality or something, because you seem to be very. I saw your tweets talking about CBT, and it's
Hmm.
not a panacea. That's like the entry level version, and there's some DBT. There's some other things that you can do on top of it, and I haven't done any of those things essentially. So I'm wondering if, like, I'm leaving some easy wins on the table, or how do you conceptualize that? Like, what's your approach to therapy in general?
Not unfortunately not easy wins. They're very difficult, painful wins, but they are wins nonetheless. I actually think there is a point where you hit diminishing returns, and the research usually suggests is that's around 28 weeks, about
Mm,
half a year, 6 months. That being said, I think as my experience on both sides of the couch, that 6 month to 3 year range, some of the best work happens, but like there are huge blocks in between. So my own analyst, he is like infinitely more trained and experienced. He's been as licensed for as long as I've been alive. Like he's good. And we'll go through months where nothing happens. I'll get frustrated or annoyed, and I'm losing money because it can. He's good and he's worth every penny. But then after those few months, he's going to say something that he'd been considering or has really well thought out, had really thought out, and I will crack open like an egg. And I do this work myself. I like to think I'm fairly insightful, but to be able to break through some of those layers of awareness to go, oh, you're right. That is what I do. That is who I am. That is how I'm continuing some of those patterns. And I didn't see it. I didn't know it. And some of those are the most valuable insights. And my analyst will joke. He says, "Yeah, that's how I made up for all of those other weeks where where maybe we weren't having a breakthrough every couple of sessions." Um, but to kind of to your point, cognitive behavioral therapy, that is usually based on let's not really go into the past too much. What are the symptoms? What do you want to work on? Here's some very specific, measurable things that you can start doing about it, and that's great. I think that's really helpful. It is still more in the realm of advice, and it's, hey, just do this hard thing until it's not hard anymore. There's value to it, but a lot of times CBT is pushed because there are limitations. Like I worked in the VA for 3 years,
mm,
and one of the difficulties is we had very long wait lists. So a 12-week therapy protocol, like we can get them on their feet, we can get them working, we can get them, communicating with their family again, and then hey, you're doing well enough that like unfortunately we have to maybe look to some of the people who are like haven't had any work done and they need a lot of help. And you say that to a veteran and they say, "Please give away my hour. I want you to help them the way you helped me." But as a therapist, that was always hard for me because I said we could still do more. Like we could go deeper. We can have more long-term change and development. But unfortunately, I think that is a pro and the con of some of these more brief modalities.
got it, got it. And so, let's say that somebody's interested in really going deep and
Hmm.
addressing issues. I love that we're doing this on January 1st, and everyone is focusing on New Year's resolutions. I think oftentimes people don't connect the dots as far as some of their negative behaviors or things that they're struggling with that are causing negative outcomes in their life, and some
Hmm.
early childhood trauma. I'm a big advocate of understanding your childhood trauma, doing an ACEs survey and figuring out what adverse childhood experiences you suffered, being honest about your childhood growing up. I see a lot of folks that I like to call it the parent in their own head. I hear them speaking oftentimes when I talk to them. It's like, well, were you spanked as a kid? Well, yeah, but I was I was a bad kid and I deserved it. I'm really glad sort of this excusing of the parental behavior. And I think that is handicapping some people. I think this
Hmm.
failure to honestly assess and actually maybe even look at the data around, like look at that ACEs study. Dr. Vincent Felitti did great work, sort of tying these ACEs with medical outcomes, because Kaiser Permanente, for people that aren't aware, they are an insurer and a healthcare provider, right? So
Hmm.
his job was to figure out why these people in this obesity clinic were having all of these, negative outcomes, so they could save, Kaiser some money, right? And he's just happened to uncover, like, oh, these people actually had, typically sexual trauma in their childhood that caused them to fall off the wagon, and that was the start of it, right? So that's a very long preamble, but I really believe that this is an important thing that people should take stock of. And there's other things, obviously, that therapy can address, dysfunctional family systems and all these sorts of things that can contribute to getting in the way of people's goals. So
Hmm.
talk me through. This is like a very, very long preamble to the question, but what do you suggest for somebody who is looking to do that deeper work? That's like, man, I really have problems in my life. I'd really like to change my year this year. What can I do?
I think that's a really good question. I also think it's really good that you brought up Kaiser Permanente and spanking. I'm probably going to go like a big circle around all of this. But the difference between preventative care and corrective care, you usually see more of these preventative cares in places like Kaiser Permanente or the VA, which is funded by taxpayer dollars. They don't make more money by you coming to more appointments. They actually lose money by you coming to more appointments. So they like to look at, okay, what are they eating? How much are they moving? Like what can you do to keep yourself from kind of going into the deep end? And we see really great results from that. Even being able to screen people in emergency rooms, or when they're coming out of an inpatient care, to connect them with a therapist to say, what are your goals? We want to keep hold of you. We don't want to lose you. We don't want you to like fall through the cracks until you find your way back up into the emergency room. So these are great, but that's also the kind of therapy that you're getting in these big hospitals or community care centers. If you want to go deeper, you typically have to find somebody who takes a developmental approach, a little bit more open-ended therapy. I'm biased towards psychoanalysis, but there are other great approaches. Gestalt therapy, that's not for people who are uncomfortable with tears and screaming. It's usually very emotional, but its purpose is for you to go like, what do you want to get out of this? Where can we go? Let's go deeper. Let's go deeper. Let's go deeper, until they both agree, hey, I think this is a good time for us to like end this episode of care or go off and be your own therapist. But unfortunately, because they're not very well, what's the word, supported, endorsed by large insurance companies and giant hospital networks, you tend to find them in more private or group practices, very small agencies. Um, Gosh, I wish there were more of them. Even clinical training is kind of shying away from these old traditional classical developmental depth models and into these brief manualized, let's just get them up, let's get them working, let's take a scalpel and just cut out the infection and then go on, which is great, but there's unfortunately the other one's a little bit more expensive. Actually, I'm a huge advocate for sliding scale fees. When you meet some of these private therapists, some of them have been practicing for decades. They have a lot of gray hair. They're pretty well established. They're very comfortable. They're not aching for new clients. So if you find them and you are really going through a financial hardship, they're very flexible with their fees. They're saying, what can you pay? Or based off of how much money you make per month, I'm going to put in an equation that's this much money. We'll go on for as long as we can. They're out there. They just take a little bit more legwork to find. Psychology Today is a great resource. You can usually, you can shop around for a therapist in Psychology Today.
Yeah, I've seen that, and maybe you could just give us a quick Cliff Notes overview of what someone should look for, because I've seen the Psychology Today website, and people have LCSW and LMFT, all these acronyms, right? So what should somebody
Hmm.
look for if they're on Psychology Today looking for some help?
That's a great question. I know this stuff so well that I almost forget that other people don't know what an LPC or an LCPC is. Typically, there are different licenses and there are different degree requirements for those licenses. So social workers, people who have a master's or a license for a master's degree in social work and a license to practice clinical social work. They can make terrific therapists. Some of the best therapists I know are social workers, but a lot of people who come to therapy aren't really looking for social work issues. They're maybe not looking for maybe lower Maslow stuff, where to live, where their next meal is coming from, or how to develop that, how to find their job, how to get more reliable housing and food. If people are coming for, people are coming for like a depression or a trauma, but they otherwise, they have connections, they have a home, they have stability. They're typically not looking for a social worker. So counselors is more of a broad term. You can get a master's degree in psychology, and LPC and LCPC are the licenses to practice counseling. So I'm a psychologist. I have a doctorate in psychology and clinical psychology. And so my license is kind of the bigger umbrella. I have the license to practice psychology. That includes psychological testing as well as psychotherapy. Also, there are some research privileges that come with that as well. Not everybody needs that high a level of care. So I tend to kind of encourage people to look at, where maybe in that Maslow hierarchy you're looking for, but also personality fit. Even if you get like a Harvard trained psychologist who has 1,000 publications and the best research articles, but you can't connect with them, they're just like a robot, they're Spock, they're just completely unemotional, and you can't connect with them, that's not going to be a good fit. But you could get a social worker who's maybe gone through the exact same traumas you have, or you just click and they look you in your eyes and they can get you. That can mediate for maybe less training or a shorter education, or fewer clinical hours. I've some of the best fits I've had were with I had a great fit with a postdoc, and one of the best therapists I ever had actually had a master's in education before he pursued psychology. So you really never know who's going to be the best fit. Usually around 4 weeks you can get a sense for, this person can help me, or maybe I should look elsewhere. Don't be afraid to do that. Fire your therapist. If you tell them, hey, I don't think it's a good fit, they could say, good, I'm glad you learned this. I want you to find a better fit. I want you to get the best help, even if that's not with me. So like, maybe they can have a referral, or maybe they can, find somebody who's a better fit for them. That's probably my biggest recommendation. Don't be afraid to tell them, I don't think we're a good fit.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So just to pivot back to one of the things you raised here, that you being a psychologist, like if I understand that correctly, you can diagnose somebody with things from the DSM-5, for example, right? So you can, somebody with a personality disorder or ADHD or any of these sort of conditions. Do you think, this is maybe a loaded question, do you think the DSM-5 is a good thing, or the DSM in general? Like, I've heard a lot of criticisms of the DSM as far as being not scientific, and come to it was arrived based off of some shenanigans, and so I want to get your perspective. Like, how do you, I think you come from a psychoanalytic tradition, which is more, that's like Freudian, right? Like that's kind of like the origin of that school ish, right?
Yeah.
Like some other folks too.
He wrote in the horse and buggy era. We've learned a lot in the last 100 years, but as much as we have learned, and as much as we've been able to maybe separate the wheat from the chaff with Freud, a lot of his ideas still hold up. But yeah, the DSM, there's a saying I like, all models are wrong, some models are useful. The DSM isn't bad. It's better if you can use a bunch of other models to kind of triangulate. I like the PDM, the psychoanalytic or psychodynamic diagnostic manual. That goes a little bit more into personality and how you relate to other people, but it does triangulate really well with the DSM. If you kind of look at, hey, diagnostically based off of this very rigid checklist, you might meet DSM criteria for this, but with the PDM and how this might influence your personality and how you relate to others, we can kind of get a more robust or deeper understanding of a person. But I have my own personal criticisms with the DSM. There are some diagnoses that I think are too rigid. They exclude people or unnecessarily create subcategories when a single category that's broad and developmental, like it probably was 30 or 40 years ago, would probably do better. And kind of to your point, there are some shenanigans. Some diagnoses are after they invent a medication. And unfortunately,
Mm,
there are a lot of lobbyists on the DSM boards, and every edition of the DSM gets wider. Social anxiety disorder is probably the biggest example of that. Historically, that was just called being shy, and that was not included into the DSM until a medication for anxiety came out that was just very mild. And they wanted to sell the medication for this mild anxiety, and they found a way to attach it. They found it helped people who were a little shy, have a little bit less anxiety when they're in social situations or interacting with people. And boom, now there's this big impairment that people want to throw medication at. And social anxiety is one of the, I don't want to say it's easy. It's a very difficult, challenging situation. But I think that that's one of the, when people come to therapy, it's not incremental improvement, it's exponential improvement. Like they get through the first barrier and they just explode, they grow, they develop, they thrive more often than not. I almost think it's unnecessary to throw a medication and a serious diagnosis at that.
yeah, I agree. I always, just personally, when I'm looking at any sort of medical intervention, I try to be conservative. It feels like the world has shifted. It feels like it's the fast track to medication from the start, and I feel like that should be after you've tried everything else. And it seems like the evidence around the most common psychological problems, depression, generalized anxiety disorder, these things are treatable even more effectively based on what data you're looking at by things like meditation, mindfulness meditation, exercise, sauna. There's all these sort of modalities that are very, very low risk, and I feel like people don't really do this now. It's like, hey doc, give me the Prozac, let's give me some SSRIs, and I'm going to solve my problems. And I've always hated that approach.
Well, I want to put a caveat on that. There is an organic depression where it is biochemical, structural, it's in your brain. And if there is a biological origin, a biological intervention is incredible. One of the biggest miracles I ever saw was a person who should not have survived his suicide attempt. It was not a cry for help. It was like a 1 in a million chance of surviving. And he did. He took lithium, or he was given lithium in an emergency room, and he became he became like a normal person again. In fact, when he was healthy and his body was fixed enough that we could start doing psychotherapy, the first thing he said to me is, how much of me is me, and how much of me are the actual chemicals bouncing around in my brain? And I remember going, that's deep, let's dig into it. And it was an incredible journey of therapy. But like I just think that those organic origins of a mood disorder, the organic depression, is a lot more rare. I would say maybe 1 to 5% of the people who get diagnosed with mood disorder, it's organic in origin. Very often, it's people they're unhappy with their jobs, they're unhappy with their relationships, they have a childhood history of trauma, and their depression is directly related to their relationship with history and other people. And that therapy is great for that, because you can change your relationship with history. You can develop new ways to interact with people in incredible, transformative ways, completely unrelated to whether or not you're putting a chemical solution in there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd heard that. I think I heard Jordan Peterson talking about that. And so how would you know? Like how do we know if it's biological in origin, or something that's like would more aptly be described as like you have a shitty life? Like of course you're you're going through it.
My easy answer is, life's hard. I don't meet anybody who's never had an adverse experience whatsoever. Like they're 30 years old and they stub their toe for the first time, or they step on a Lego and they're like, no, this is the worst pain I've ever experienced, I need therapy. But it's really tricky when it's an organic illness. I mean, sometimes that kind of depression, you can walk into a room and the room will get colder. And until we have really cheap and easy brain scans or ways to read, structure or chemical issues, there's going to be a lot of trial and error involved. Maybe they're going to go on a medication regimen. Maybe they're going to change their medication regimen. Maybe they're going to be in therapy for a while. And actually, one of my biggest indicators of whether or not it's organic in origin is if they have a fulfilling career, if they love their job, or they have meaningful relationships. Sometimes they'll have a spouse or sibling or parents who they love them, and they can't really point to being beaten or anything. That they're actually very aware that they have everything going for them, and yet they have this sense of dread and despair, and they can't get up in the morning. They can't function, and they're really impaired. Sometimes giving them a medication evaluation with a psychiatrist or a nurse, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, they identify, hey, this is organic. This is based off of either your brain structure or this particular medication regimen is going to really help you.
That's interesting. I really struggle with this whole medication issue. Like, it feels to me like the hypothesis is one thing, but it doesn't seem that it's been scientifically validated. Meaning,
it's been disproved a few times. The chemical imbalance theory, it's disproved a lot.
That's the thing I'm pointing at, because I hear people say, "No, I've got a chemical imbalance," but when you actually poke at that question, it's like, "Well, what do you mean chemical imbalance? And in where? And which chemicals are you talking about? And how do you know? Like, you're not measuring anything, as far as I know." And so that always struck me. It's always sort of put me at odds and a little bit on edge when people push that theory. It just doesn't seem to square for me.
Well, medicine. I hate to say this. I'm not a physician, but medicine is it is in many ways a human science. And you get 10 psychiatrists in a room, they're going to have opinions, just the way you get 10 psychologists in a room and they're going to have entirely different theoretical orientations or approaches to change and transformation. Psychiatrists are going to say, no, this is my approach to identifying these conditions. This is the medication regimen that I like to do, and then adjust based off of my trial and error. And you get them all in a room with each other, they'll argue, they'll all disagree. They'll say, oh, no, not sertraline, it should be this. And a lot of it is a matter of their experience, their approaches, their opinions. But at the end of the day, if you talk with them long enough, they'll say some of this is trial and error, and that's not scary. It's just, I'm here with you. We're going to figure it out together, and we're going to get you on. Ideally, we're going to get you on the right track. Hopefully, if it is for a mood disorder or a trauma disorder, they're also having conversations about what life would have to look like for you to get off that medication. Being able to do a good medication that makes you more receptive and open to try some of the difficult things in therapy, like exposure for trauma. There's really no way to recalibrate the central nervous system except to imagine yourself or to physically put yourself in situations where you are safe, but triggering that alarm system, that feeling of threat, and really sitting with that while knowing you are completely safe. And some people who are really have a very extreme PTSD, very severe PTSD, that could be a tall order. And a little bit of medication assistance can make them more likely to try it or be willing to go. I pick on Walmart a lot. Veterans and PTSD in Walmart, I can always guess. They park by the garden entrance because you can check out faster, you can get out quicker. Great, stay in Walmart for 5 more minutes. Have a timer. If you really can't make it to 5 minutes, go to Walmart the next day and try to beat it by 30 seconds. And you're gonna put yourself in positions where you get to kind of recalibrate that alarm system, because you want it to be accurate. When if a car is coming at you, you don't want to think, gee, is this an accurate response? You want to jump out of the way and keep yourself safe.
Yeah, for sure. That whole amygdala, you really keep score of the threats in your environment. That's a
Hmm.
useful evolutionary mechanism, but it feels like a lot of these things, like anxiety and depression, I don't even know if they're different things. It always feels like those are kind of two sides of the same coin for me. But that's like this overactivity of that system. And I think to your point, like everything I've read is like the only cure for this is really exposure therapy. It's voluntarily exposing yourself to the thing that you're afraid of. Like that's literally the only cure, which is not much comfort to people in those situations.
I'm reluctant to use the word cure. My expertise is in growth and transformation. So like if this is where you are, let's develop it. But realistically, anxiety is kind of to our point. It's useful. It's helpful. If somebody came to me and they said, "Doc, I don't want to experience any anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10. I want zero anxiety," and I would say, "So you don't want to care if your kid comes home being bullied? You don't want to care if like your wife gets hit by a car and and you have to be by their bedside every day?" Like some of that distress is accurate, appropriate responses to situations, and you can have a healthy relationship with that. And sometimes that's sadness, sometimes that's fear, sometimes it's anger. But if you're in a position where anger is the healthy and appropriate response, it would behoove you to have a healthy relationship with anger, or to at least develop a healthier relationship with anger. So like cure is that's a funny word.
Yeah, that's shorthand for getting better. Like that's
Right.
that is the prescription for treating it. I guess is probably the
Uh-huh.
better way to phrase that. So try.
I would actually encourage people to run for the hills if their therapist is saying, "Yeah, I could cure you." Oh, the cure for that is this. Let's do it this way and you'll be cured.
Yeah, for sure. It's all progress, man, all progress. So
Hmm.
you did pique my interest talking about your VA stuff, and also I'm a veteran. I saw that you're a veteran. Um, I'm very
Oh, thank you for
interested.
your service.
Yeah, thank you.
Or
That
your
makes
willingness to serve. I like to say thank you for your willingness to serve because not everybody is happy with their service.
Yeah, boy, I've really got issues with that. My kids always prod me anytime it's like Veterans Day or something. They kind of rib me by saying that because that's a whole other can of worms I don't want to get into in this conversation.
All right.
But um, the PTSD thing and the medication, like I know I said I'm very skeptical of medications, but I've been following the MAPS group for a while. Are you familiar with those folks?
No, tell me a little bit about
It's
them.
a multidisciplinary association of psychedelic sciences, and this is Rick Doblin's
Okay.
group, and they've been doing they had I think phase 3 MDMA trials for PTSD, particularly around veterans, and it seemed to be showing like massive improvements. So do you follow any of that stuff, or do you have any general opinions on psychedelics? Because they seem like they the Venn diagram between psychology and psychedelics is has a fair bit of overlap.
Yeah, it's not a shortcut. I think I am tickled that mental health is getting into it. If you are going to try a deep space trip to address some stuff, some heavy stuff is probably going to come out, and it's good that maybe there's a therapist around as opposed to just some housewife, guide, shaman type person. But yeah, it's no substitute for the work. Kind of to my point earlier, there's no shortcut to recalibrating your system besides exposure. So sometimes putting yourself in a position where you can expose yourself to it. EMDR is popular because you can expose yourself imaginally to your trauma in a way where you can actually access that information or go there. And when some people they don't want to go there, they have enough mental blocks around it. Psychedelic assisted therapy is a way to get there. Um, I'm cautious about MDMA. That is a pretty heavy one. It can often impact your neurons have these dendrites that are kind of like fingers, and if you are dumping all of your neurochemicals at once in kind of an extreme dose, the way MDMA does, it's almost like you're taking off the knuckles of the end of your dendrites. So will they still communicate? Yes, but they're just going to be like one little digit shorter. I think the best therapeutic application of something like MDMA would be in hospice, which it was used in hospice in the 1980s. And I saw a commercial for when somebody who said that it helped them come to terms with the fact that they were dying, so they skipped through a lot of the bullshit and they were able to spend their last moments connected to their family in a profound and meaningful way. It brought a tear to my eye. I wept. So I'm not entirely against psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Mushrooms are quite popular. I think there's a really great book called Changing Your Mind.
Oh, I love that book, man. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember the author?
Uh,
Daniel something?
no, no, no. He did the farm stuff. He did the ag stuff for a while.
I'm blanking on his name, but
Michael Pollan. Michael Pollan.
Mike Pollan. Thank you. So what I really like about what he brought to the conversation, which is the first time you use a psychedelic substance, it's going to be a profound transformative experience. After that, you're probably just doing drugs. It's probably just like, woo, I want to feel that again. But you do it once, you're going to have a profound transformative experience. And if you are in an appropriate set, have a set and setting, I think is his terminology, um, you're going to get something out of it. Unfortunately, a lot of how that works neurochemically is it stimulates regions of your brain that make you feel profound without actually having a profound thought. I'm not saying it's a placebo effect, it works, but it's not a shortcut for doing the work. I think that ideally you do a bunch of sessions leading up to the psychedelic assisted therapy. You have the experience, and then you come back to maybe an established therapist who you have a really good relationship with, and you go, this is what came out. I want to unpack this. I want to work through this. Like I broke through 3 of my walls. Let's clear out the rubble and let's see what walls are left over. So you gotta also do the work.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm somebody who's been helped a lot from psychedelics. That was actually one of the things that therapist in Washington sort of did I can't tell you to look into this. 'Cause I've never been a drug guy, but, and so I'm like, I can read between the lines, man. And so I did work with psilocybin, and it was transformational for me. And it's not just that one and done. That wasn't my experience. Like every time on a very high dose, I would still get these insights, and they were real insights. It wasn't just me feeling profound. Because I'm a person that maybe it's just my own personal biology, but because of my trauma, like I'm a person that generally doesn't feel anything, like completely numb. I jokingly call it the cancer box. I'll just stuff all the feelings, whatever they are, and I don't feel anything, but I know they're there somewhere. The body keeps a score. I watched enough Gabor Mate to know this is a ticking time bomb that's probably going to kill me. But every time it's like, oh wow, like I didn't know this about myself. It really does seem to push stuff to the forefront. But I agree with you that it doesn't fix anything. All it does is it shoves a problem in your face and say, here's why you're doing this dumb. And that you might want to take care of it, but there's still this work after the fact that needs to take place. One of my problems is that there doesn't seem to be a lot of psychedelic assisted, psychologist supported, psychotherapy, psilocybin programs around. Is you have to get into a trial maybe, and it's very difficult with it being, classified the way it is by the federal government. It's very difficult to work with, and so I think a lot of people like me, it's like, well, you do it on your own, and you talk to your therapist later about it, which is a little bit of a shame.
Well, I think that's mostly how it plays out. People are reading. I think ketamine right now is really big, and I think the state of Michigan is probably one of the spearheading kind of ketamine therapy. People read this and they go, "Oh, it's promising." Well, my neighbor Jeff, he knows he's got a plug for ketamine, so I'm just gonna buy a whole bunch of that, and now I'm doing drugs.
Well, isn't Mind Bloom like available at like most places? 'Cause, like I'm in Tennessee, and I know that's available here in Tennessee, and so I'm like it's, which is surprising. It's a super conservative state. I don't know, and I don't even. Maybe you can talk about that. Like, do you know what the effectiveness of ketamine therapy is? It seems to me, based on my read, that it's something you have to take all the time. It's like constantly have to be redosed, and then there seems to be some impact towards particularly depression, but I don't know. This is just my lay reading of Google.
I'm just going to give a really broad response here. We just have different layers of awareness, and Freud talked about hit, I guess, three levels, conscious, preconscious, unconscious. But we have many levels of awareness and different states of awareness. If we're tired, if we're sleepy, we're in a different state of awareness. If we're drunk, we're in a different state of awareness. Um, we being able to access some of those parts of ourselves is really the mechanism of insight and change, sort of almost that intersection of acceptance and change. This is what's going on. This is the reality. What, if at all, do I even want to do about it? And for people who've had a lot of trauma, who maybe have like that dimmer switch that they like to keep towards numb, that is preventing an access to areas of awareness. So substances like MDMA, ketamine, acid, mushrooms, is very, very powerful psychedelics. They bring us into these areas of our life that we have kind of closed off and shut off. And it really helps us access parts of ourselves. And in very extreme cases of trauma, even depression in its most extreme state, depression can be a psychosis. We can shut down a big part of ourselves. And sometimes being able to reconnect with that, we reconnect with our vitality, we reconnect with ourselves, we reconnect with our priorities. We don't need a big potent drug to do that, but it is a great way to access that. It's maybe a little bit quicker. But I don't think it's the drug itself that is the mechanism of change. It is I'm now confronting. I'm now being exposed to these things. I'm now going into the deep, dark corners of my mind that I've locked away behind a few doors of steel and concrete. It does provide kind of a sledgehammer effect, and then we come out a little bit more. So for me, I think the big takeaway is that it does help us access some of these deeper layers of awareness. But therapy is a great way to do it. I'm biased. I think therapy is an excellent way to do it, but you need to know somebody who knows how to do that. There's a lot of training involved. I mentioned Gestalt psychotherapy earlier. There's a technique called the empty chair technique. A lot of people can learn it in a weekend, but people who've done it for months, years, decades, they can have you sit in the chair and they can have you access parts of your mind, parts of your life, parts of your history that you have locked away and buried and thrown into a river. And that's why I say it's not for people who are uncomfortable with affect. Like, there will be tears, there will be screaming. But if you get somebody who's trained, has the experience, because they can re-traumatize you if you're poorly trained in this technique, you can get more out of that than I'm biased. I think you can get more out of that than any psychedelic assisted psychotherapy.
Cool. Thanks for that insight. It's an interesting perspective. I have a quick switch here. What do you know about highly sensitive people?
Oh, at HSP?
Yes.
Oh, that's an interesting construct. It's not a real diagnosis. It's pop psychology. There is some evidence to suggest that there are some people who are maybe a little bit more empathetic, or they have more. There's a type of neuron in the brain called mirror neurons, that people might have a larger collection of that. The thing is that a lot of these people who call themselves highly sensitive people or very empathetic, they're not very accurate in their interpretations. And it's really interesting to find if they can learn to challenge that or test their assumptions with reality, that they actually become a little bit less sensitive to these inaccuracies. So it's an interesting diagnosis. I'm not ever going to say that it doesn't exist, but it does offer a thread that I can typically pull on, and eventually that thread's going to unravel into something bigger, and we can work on whatever falls out of that.
Interesting, because I'm married to somebody and I've got girls who fit the HSP paradigm, right? Let's put it that way. And I don't know what this is, but there's something to it. That's why I'm asking the question. I'm trying to figure this out.
Right.
They all say the same thing, which is, and they're all very perceptive too. Like, for example, I'm the person that every day presents exactly the same way. Like, I'm at work, you can't tell I'm having the worst day of my life or the best day of my life, but they can always tell. They're like, "What's wrong with you?" right? Like they can, and they when I talk to all of them, they say the same thing. Like, I can feel physically in my body when you're having, some sort of, thing going on. And it's
Hmm.
in a lot of ways it's spooky, and in some ways they've been completely dead on, and even in really weird ways, like multiple, like I had was my wife's sister's husband committed suicide, and on that day multiple kids woke up and like, what's going on, something's wrong. Really creepy stuff. And I'm like a super
Hmm.
empirical dude. Like, I'm evidence based. I'm very, I'm not into woo at all. And there's just things like that that have made it clear to me there's something going on, and I'm just trying to
Hmm.
figure this out. So I want to know if you know anything about that can help me steer here.
Yes, without delving kind of dangerously close into a psychotherapy um, response, that is how they're relating to you. The thing about intuition is it is perception. We have senses. Everyone knows sort of about the five major senses, but we have more than that. We can sense temperature. We can sense time. There are a lot of where our brain is constantly getting input from everywhere. So someone like myself, I can study that, when somebody lies to you, their voice typically goes up a bit of an octave because they're maybe really excited to say something, or maybe they're looking in a particular way. They're having a hard time looking you in the eye because they're making something up on the spot, or maybe their hands are revealing some of their nerves and anxiety. And I'll go, okay, I'm connecting a bunch of dots here. Maybe it's this. Most people aren't consciously going, oh, their voice went up an octave, their eyes are going up and to the left, and their hands are shaking. This person's lying to me. They're going, this motherfucker's just lying to me. They're just lying through their teeth, and I don't know what it is, but I know I can't trust this person. So you're talking about people who are intimately aware of you. They not only know your buttons, you know their buttons. You've probably installed some of their buttons. They're aware.
It's worse than this, man. Like, this is one of the things that I used to get into arguments with my wife with when we first were married, is that she would just instantly be like, "This person's a piece of shit," and I'd be like, I'm like, "Stop it! You're just being mean." And I'm telling you, with
Uh-huh.
100% certainty, I've
Oh yeah.
learned that every person that she flagged and could have just met within 2 minutes at a party,
Hmm.
5 years later, some horrible thing came out, and I'm like, oh my God, you were right. And there's been enough of those that it's like,
Hmm.
I'm like, you've got something. Like, there's
Hmm.
some intuition, or there's, I swear it's biological. I feel like it,
Oh.
because it's in my, it runs in my mother's family, or my wife's mother's family, all on this. Like, it's something's going on, and I'm just trying to understand, like, what am I dealing with here, man? This feels creepy and spooky to me.
Oh, no, intuition is measurable. Intuition is objective and measurable. And I absolutely believe in women's intuition because they have to be perceptive. I mean, think about dating and relationships when you're young, when you're 13, 14, you're just post-pubescent. And, you have to learn really early on, is this person going to harm me? Is this person going to be a threat? So they, again, we can pick it out, maybe, maybe by the way they smile, or maybe a look in their eye, and we can objectively measure that. And we have tests where we can cut out just the eyes, and you say, what emotions are they feeling? And people are going to be all over the board. Some people aren't going to be good at it. Some people are going to be great at it. But a lot of that is learned. A lot of that is intuited. Even empathy can be learned. It's better if it's taught when you're a child, but it can be learned. So yeah, an intuition is real. And it's scary. But again, without this becoming about your therapy or family therapy,
Sure.
uh, your family unit, your family household, their radars are going to be a little bit more particularly tuned to each other than strangers, because they'll know by your cough. They'll know by how you walk up and down the stairs. Uh-oh, he's in this mood, or oh great, he's in that mood. That's everybody though. Um,
Right, right. And I think you call out something important, which is, I think this is why women generally are more, um, they're more sensitive to negative emotion, right? I think that evolutionarily they've had to be, because they're taking care of kids. Like you can't be around somebody who's going to potentially endanger your child. Like they have to be,
Right.
and obviously they're weaker, physically than a man, right? So you have to be constantly on guard. And I think that sort of like we talked about, that anxiety thing that's always spinning up is really, it served an evolutionary purpose, but it seems like it's kind of gone off the rails as of late. It's tons of tons of anxiety, depression in the world right now. It's all over TikTok. Like, I don't know how much of that is real and how much of it is, just some sort of social contagion, but it definitely seems to be on the rise.
It when the message is this is how it is and there's nothing we can do about it, the message is wrong. And I want to say this with a lot of warmth and empathy because a lot of these issues are very hard. We're seeing a rise in things like social anxiety, autism, ADHD, schizoid personality types. In Japan, there's a condition called hikikomori, which is there are these people, they're typically young, they start as children, and they're told you've got to be successful, you got to get straight A's, you got to get into the best university, you got to become a doctor, engineer, lawyer, and then they don't, and so they become kind of shut-ins. They stay in their apartments or their childhood bedrooms, and they play video games, they get on the internet, and they are chronically online, but they don't go into society, or they don't connect with the community in ways that are helpful and necessary. And the course of treatment is get out into society, become ideally a contributing member to society, but like participate in it, like get into it. And it's terrifying, it's hard, it's a learning curve. And the people who do and the people who put in the work, they grow, they transform, real, like within reason, but like some of these conditions go away entirely. You can't heal autism. That's a brain structure. But a lot of these people, their symptoms go away, and they find out maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the social anxiety or the schizoid personality structure or the whatever the American equivalent to hikikomori might be. But I only draw the line at people saying there's nothing we can do about it. There's always something you can do about it. It's not always simple, it's not always easy, but there's always something you can do about it.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, I know you got a hard stop here, and that's probably a great place to end it. There's always something you can do, always something you can do to move forward and improve. So tell everyone where they can find you, man.
Right now I'm on Twitter for Dr. Perin. I have a website, www.edwardperin.com. Great way to just drop me a link, start a conversation. I could, if you're interested in psychotherapy and you're in the great state of Ohio, please reach out. I don't have a lot of openings left in my private practice, but there's still a few hours here and there that I might be able to fit somebody in. I'd love to hear from you.
All right. Well, thanks for stopping by, man. I could have talked for hours, but I know you got to go. Take it easy.
Yeah, cool beans. Take care, man.
Yeah, bye-bye.